Hey everybody, my name is Daniel Harms here at the RGR Football Channel, and this week we're going to continue our free agent list and our free agent note sheet essentially of what players are going to be free agents for the Chiefs, who they could look at in free agency, and maybe some of the contracts that they're looking at for some of these players. And this week is all about defensive end. The Chiefs are going to have three players in our estimation no longer on the team sooner rather than later. We assume that Frank Clark's going to be designated for a June 1st a post June 1st cut, which gives the team much more wiggle room, saves gives about $8 million in dead cap, which is ideal for the situation. Maybe they look to get him back on a smaller 1 year deal. I personally am not sure that's where they're going to go, but you also have a free agent in Melvin Ingram and Alex Okafor you're going to have to replace. All experienced guys that are essentially turning over and were your starters for the majority of this season. So they have to do a little bit of reworking, whether that's going to be bringing Melvin Ingram back, which I think should be a priority because he showed actually this was one of his best seasons ever in terms of run production, in terms of pass production. He's a pass rush production. It's his best season in the last 3 years that he's been in as a pass rusher. He showed all of that juice and the tenacity, the strength that we've seen from the Chargers standpoint. He was on the Chargers for years, played against the Chiefs for years. So we've seen him be productive and known what he is at his best. He's obviously not the best player anymore, almost 37 years old, but clearly still has enough to provide this team maybe a 1 year deal, maybe a smaller 2 year contract to get as much out of him as you can before trying to pass the torch on to younger players. I don't expect Alex Okafor to be back. And like I mentioned, I don't expect Frank Clark to be back. So what does that leave? I personally think that you're going to see them draft a top 100 player, whether it's defensive end in the first, second, or third round. That's going to happen in my book. They could double down at defensive end, but there are still players on the roster that are younger. You have Josh Kando, they drafted in the fourth round last year. You have a guy who was injured all of last year, who couldn't get drafted, in Malik Herring, who's probably going to start to practice for the Chiefs this offseason and get probably a look at that practice squad, see what he can do. You still have Mike Dana as well, who's pretty much what he is. You see it flashes every now and then from Mike Dana, but he is a backup replacement level player. That's pretty much what he's going to be. I wanted to see some more growth out of him. Maybe with the new defensive line coach, we'll see that out of him this season. But the fact of the matter is they got to address that situation on defensive line and defensive end, and it has to come pretty soon. They don't have enough talent and enough top-level talent to compete. And as much as they've been getting pressures from guys in the interior, what you want is Chris Jones to be able to get pressures, a ton of pressures, and force quarterbacks into the waiting arms of defensive ends. Frank Clark was unable to do that. Melvin Ingram did everything he possibly could to convert some of those to sacks and did a good job. But when you have an escape route up the left side, it's not always going to work. And Frank Clark, I don't think, should be back next year. So, like I said, what are we looking at in the free agent market for players that can come in, maybe be a starter if you need them to be, but have some wiggle room to be replacement players or backups that you could situationally get in there? I think the biggest names that jump off the page, specifically in terms of guys who were being paid a lot last year, are all older guys, except for one guy, and that's the Fowler Jr., who's just not the guy for me. He had one season where he was productive, and it was in LA with the Rams when you're playing with Aaron Donald, who was just racking up sacks and pressures and getting him into freeloaders. I think that Dante Fowler could be a replacement level type of player. I don't expect him to be a starting kind of player. I also don't expect Spags and this staff to have two defensive ends if they bring Melvin Ingram back that are lighter. Melvin Ingram's like 247, 248, and Dante Fowler is 255. Like, they're both more predicated on their speed to power, not necessarily power guys, 265, 280 almost in some of these areas. So Dante Fowler is not a guy that I expect, but again, he's going to be not as expensive as he was. He made $15 million last year in Atlanta. That's just not going to happen this year. He was unproductive his last 2 seasons in Atlanta. They got him paid, I think, clearing about 7.5 sacks over the last 2 years. There's a guy on this free agent list that has been mentioned around everywhere in Kansas City because he played in Kansas City 2 years ago. Or 3 years ago now. Yeah, 3 years ago now. He played 2 seasons in Miami, and Emmanuel Ogbah is coming off back-to-back 9-sack seasons. The biggest improvement that I saw was his first year, he played the majority of the defensive snaps. He was basically the starter at defensive end, got 9 sacks. That's a good season and Brian Flores did a great job of getting the most out of him. Last year, his numbers stayed the same or relatively same, and his snap percentages went down a little bit, more around the 60 and 50% of the snaps. I think that's ideal for a guy who's 28, going to be 29 by the end of next year. You want to start to limit some of his snap counts, and I think Ogbah is going to be a guy that you can look to get on the free agent market. Made $7.5 million last year. I think you can definitely get him in to the team. He might be a little more expensive than you think, though. I think 7.5 after 2 years of 9 sacks gets him a bump in pay. You're probably going to have to look to pay him around $10 million a year on a 1-year, 2-year deal. I think that you have 2 years left of Ogbah, and we know that he works well in the system because he played well here. He got himself a good contract with Miami out of what he did in Kansas City. So I do think that that's kind of a marriage made in heaven, the comeback, but it's not necessarily either because of the pressures either. I do think that you could have him be the quote-unquote starter at defensive end alongside Chris Jones and Melvin Ingram. I think that would be a very good starting defensive line, and then you have a defensive tackle, whoever that's going to be. But yeah, again, I think that Ogbah's a younger guy, 28 to 29. He's not up in that 30, 33 age range, and I think that Ogbah would be a good option in Kansas City. There's a couple other names on this list that I have circled, and most of them are replacement level players. I think that Arden Key has already shown to be a guy that the Chiefs are looking at, and that they brought in, if I'm not mistaken on that. But again, he had a career resurgence in San Francisco, mostly because they put a little bit more weight on him and they rushed him inside a little bit. So maybe that's what the Chiefs are going to look to do, and have him come in, maybe play more pass rushing snaps alongside Chris Jones. If you bring in an Ogbah, you can look, or even draft a guy high. You could really bring in Melvin Ingram back. I know I'm kind of tangenting myself here, but I think you can make something of that. Arden Key, not the best other guy on the outside, wasn't a great run defender at his size, but I think moving him inside, putting a little bit more weight on him, allowed him to get past guards and centers, because he's still quick. So he has that speed and quickness that tackles could figure out, but I don't think guards and centers necessarily can all the time. So there's an option there for Arden Key. There's a backup type player. He played for the Colts over the last couple of years. Al-Quadin Muhammad. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but he's definitely more of an Alex Okafor type of player. You're not going to have to pay him a whole lot, maybe $2.5, $3 million a year. He could come in. He's a solid run defender. Not going to be the best pass rusher, but we've seen a guy like Alex Okafor, who's definitely a physical specimen type of guy, just wasn't a great pass rusher anymore at his time and his age and his injuries. But if you get a guy like Muhammad coming in, and he's your second defensive end, he plays alongside, just lost his name. I already said his name, Mike Dana. And I think those two run defenders are solid, and you really kind of fill out the roster a little bit that way with some quality run defenders to be able to get to those pass rushers, give them some breaks here and there to be able to get them on the field a little bit more. And like I said, I do believe that Melvin Ingram is going to be a big priority for the Chiefs bringing him back. I think he likes playing in Kansas City. I think it was very apparent that the way he plays, the speed, the athleticism, and all of that, the speed to power, is much more evident on this defensive line, and it needs more of it, because guys like Frank Clark, who have flashes every now and then, who flashed in Seattle, he came into Kansas City, he had his playoff run, and that was really it. He didn't do a whole lot much else. He was a decent run defender, but he was never a huge pass rusher. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's just too big. He doesn't have a whole lot of moves, and the one that he really uses a whole lot is getting to the outside and then trying to find a way to spin around it. You have to have more. You have to have quickness with your feet. You have to have speed to power. And that's what Ingram brings. I think they need to get younger, more athletic. We've talked about this a whole lot. So I do think getting a guy in Ogbah who's still powerful, he's big, but he is much more athletic than Frank Clark is. And then still Arden Key is also an athletic kind of guy, more speed. Fowler is in the same mold, more of athletic speed guy. If they're looking for that, I would think he would be a backup level type of player. But all in all, this defensive end group, Dante Fowler Jr., Calais Campbell, Jason Pierre-Paul, Akeem Hicks, who's like 330 pounds, not going to be in Kansas City. Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison. these guys are all 30-year-old, 33-year-old players. You're not looking for that in Kansas City. You're looking to get younger and better. Now, like I said, I don't mind having maybe bring in some of the older guys for a 1-year deal. If you're looking for a guy in Arizona, Chandler Jones, a little bit older, but clearly one of the best pass rushers of the NFL. If you could find a way to get him in Kansas City, I could see marrying him to Chris Jones and Melvin Ingram, bringing him back, and then drafting some younger guys and letting them grow under them. I think that with your new defensive line coach, getting some newer ideas in there, some younger guys and some older guys with experience, it's really a best situation for everybody. A lot of work can go into that. You can do a good job of developing some of these players, hoping that maybe Malik Herring shows you more than what he did in college, obviously after the injury, hoping he can recover fully. Joshua Kando, Mike Dan, all of these younger guys, hopefully you can develop them with the coach and some of the older guys. But I do think that Ogbah and Ingram look to be, in my opinion, the best two options to be your plug-and-play starters next year. I think that makes a lot of sense. Ogbah knows the system. Ingram played here last year. Those guys can give way to younger players as they get older and as time goes on. And as much as I think Ogbah probably benefits from less snaps, you could probably get away with making him a starter early in the season and then maybe motioning him out a little bit now and then. When you get a younger guy, maybe you draft somebody high who starts to pick up the defense and he starts to be, shows more flash in the pass rush. I think you can figure some things out that way. So like I said, there's just not a whole lot on this list that is intriguing. Obviously, Jadeveon Clowney is always on this list, and I don't want anything to do with Clowney. Brian Kerrigan, 33 years old. Just a lot of Justin Houston, 33 years old, coming off an injury, not getting any younger. Some of these guys, Kimoko Toure showed some flashes in Indianapolis, but he's pretty much a replacement level player. Like I said, Everson Griffin, the names on here are older guys, and it's not a great list. So, I mean, Tim Ward's 24. You could maybe bring him back this season, maybe try and develop him a little bit more, but they decided to waive him. So, again, what do you guys think you want to do with defensive end? I know I mentioned off the top, I think they're going to draft one. So, outside of that, with free agency, Emmanuel Ogbah, Melvin Ingram, I want to hear what you guys would do at defensive end. I even want to hear some of the draft picks that you would give me in the first, second, or third round. Can be anywhere. I want to hear your guys' opinions on defensive end, the free agency, and defensive end in the draft. We'll definitely get to some film review on defensive ends, more so as the season goes along. Pretty sure I had one last week on Trayvon Walker, so there's an option there. Again, hope you guys enjoyed this video on free agent breakdown, what they're going to do at defensive end. Hopefully, we see some changes with the type of player that they're bringing in, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more and subscribe to RGR Football.